I'm Rock, and today I'd like to talk to you about becoming a UX professional. I thought that this would be a really relevant topic for CLU students. I imagine with the type of training you're part of, that a job in UX in that industry might be of interest. So we are going to just talk about what that might look like, and I'll talk about some of the lessons I've learned to get to this point. Let me first start with some of my work at Samsung. Can we see the slide?
Yes.
Okay. So Samsung, as you know, really big company, one of the world's leaders in developing computers, consumer electronics, and semiconductors. And it's just a massive company that just does a lot of work. It's based out of South Korea, and really what its strengths are is to be able to execute really quickly. And so it pursues a lot of innovation. Samsung, very big multinational company, focuses a lot on innovation and speed of execution. Now, you might not realize that Samsung has an R&D lab in Canada. And in fact, a lot of my local friends don't know it as well. They think that I work out of, like the shop that sells TVs and phones. But in fact, we have an office, about 125 people, and we work on a subset of Samsung's products. We're in the mobile device group, and we build software that allows companies to secure, manage, and deploy a whole bunch of devices for their employees and for the customers. And I myself am on a UX team. There's 2 researchers in my team, and then there's about 10 designers, and half of them are in Vancouver, half of them are in the Bay Area. So while I can't talk about design happening all over Samsung, I can definitely tell you about how design looks like in my particular group and during the 4 years that I've been there at Samsung. So in preparing for this talk, I was thinking about where I had met Audrey, and it brings back good memories of when I met her over 10 years ago at the CHI Doctoral Consortium. And so, as you know, CHI, one of the top HCI conferences, yeah, it feels like just yesterday. And it was just a really exciting time, sharing my research, getting to know other researchers. It's just super exciting. But it was also a time of uncertainty. Like, what was I going to do after graduate school? Lots of open questions. It was about around that same time where I was sort of questioning whether academia was a good fit for me and my family, and was starting to think about other alternatives. And so you might be in that position right now. So today I'd like to share with you some lessons that I've learned, some in grad school, some outside. And hopefully some of these might resonate with you. Now, I have to say, things were a bit different 10 years ago. First, we didn't have a pandemic. But that aside, I think that students these days, probably in your position, are a bit better prepared than I was 10 years ago. There's definitely more of an acknowledgement about user experience, possibilities for internships. There's lots of resources around that you can access for free. And so I think that you're in a pretty good position, and I hope that some of what I will talk about today will give you some tips and some practical advice on what you can do next. But I think if you don't remember anything from this talk, I want you just to remember to develop your hard skills and soft skills and discover a good fit for you. And really, I hope that my talk will help you identify learning opportunities that will be useful for you professionally. So let's start with lessons from graduate school. So when I started my master's program, that was my first encounter with human-computer interaction. In my undergrad, I was an engineer, and I had always sort of considered myself an engineer, not a designer. I don't think I had the creative chops to do that. But when I was looking into HCI, one of the first books I discovered was The Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman, a classic book, really, that talks about how everyday things are designed and how they're designed well in order to serve its function. And in this book, and just through what I learned, I discovered that that design, that there's a process behind it. And there's actually a lot of fundamentals, both in psychology and technology, that it draws from. And that it's something that I could actually contribute to. And so I found that this is something I was very interested in and that I really wanted to put more work into. One big reason that a lot of people go into graduate school is to sharpen their analytical skills, to analyze things, to be able to think sharply about particular things. And graduate school gave me the opportunity to take on a hands-on project on an interesting project and problem, and to really get experience doing all sorts of parts of research and design. So understanding the user, figuring out what the problem you're trying to solve, doing literature reviews, looking at related works, and exploring different design possibilities, doing some prototyping, testing, and so on. And it was so great to get that hands-on experience. And here's a shot of me defending my graduate thesis. And so I'm in a room here explaining to them my process, answering the questions, essentially defending it. And this part of the graduate program has been super valuable, and I really have gained a lot from that. And it's the feedback that you get, the questions, the poking of holes in your research that have really helped me to improve my research craft. You learn about things like your bias, participants' bias, psychological phenomenon that design can sort of, leverage or sort of mitigate against. And there's just a lot there. And I found that the feedback that I got from my supervisors, even from, manuscripts that were rejected from conferences, those things really helped me become a better researcher. And really laid a solid foundation for my work today. The third lesson I learned was in the area of communication skills. And it surprises me how much I draw on this today and every day for my work. So you remember I mentioned the name Don Norman. So he and Jacob Nielsen formed a UX research and consultancy group called the Nielsen-Norman Group, and they did a career survey last year, getting responses from over 700 UX practitioners. And they asked, well, what are the most useful skills you find in your work? And the top one was communication. And they found that this was one of the most important skills that they use. And so if you think about UX in particular, in HCI, just think of all the ways that you have to communicate. So one is, the design itself. You communicate that through text, through visually. Maybe if it's haptics or physical interfaces, you have to communicate it that way as well. For research, how much writing is there for planning a design, running it, reporting on results. And then there's also presenting your research, so like in presentations, in posters. And then there's also the logistics of just program management, project management, working with your teammates. There's a lot of communication there. Now, sometimes I think of all this communication is sort of being a means to an end, sort of like a necessary chore. But really, there's a lot of opportunity to get better at this in graduate school. One story comes to mind is when I was writing my PhD manuscript. On my reading committee was a very senior, very well-respected researcher, he was asked to review one of my chapters, and we arranged a meeting so that we could discuss his feedback. And so when I went into his office, he had my printed chapter, and on it was bloodied with red. Like he must have used at least 2 red pens full of ink to mark this up. And I looked at it, and I was just surprised at how, like, I thought to myself how terrible, the research was, and I'd have to go back to the drawing board. And so I didn't say that, but I sort of was like, oh, well, what do you think? And he went to me and said, oh, not bad. I just have some comments. What I appreciated from what he did was, one is he really took the time to give me feedback, lots of feedback. It turned out the meat of the research was fine, but I could have expressed things a lot more concisely, clearly, precisely, and he gave me a ton of feedback. And I have really learned to be a better writer through feedback like that, and just through all the practice I got at graduate school. So I'm happy that I graduated. Was I ready for a UX career? I wouldn't say I was. So there was a lot of things I still needed to learn. So 3 lessons that I had to learn: what UX looks like, how I contributed, or how I contribute in general, and the importance of fit. And I'll spend a bit more time on this. So I had to learn what UX looked like, it as a culture, it as a profession. Let me start with HCI and UX and how they're related. They're sort of like long lost brothers in my mind, very similar in some ways, very different in others. So how are they similar? So HCI research, and I'll say that HCI, just define it as sort of the study of design, the study of novel user interfaces. And UX is more about the production of products and services. And so they both rely on research. As a researcher, that's comforting. That's something that I could bring to the table. They also use similar design processes. So user-centered design is very important for both areas. Now, UX might call it something different. There's a term design thinking that's being used a lot in industry. I hadn't heard of that in HCI, but really the steps are very similar. And the research methods that are used in both fields are very similar. They use the same names: interviews, field studies, surveys, user testing, eye tracking, same names. That makes it easy. But they are quite different in terms of their goals. So HCI focuses on producing, scientifically valid knowledge that other people can build on, can be shared. So the generation of knowledge is very important. Teaching is very important. Producing novel interactions and interfaces are important as well, but I feel like the generation of scientific knowledge is more important. Whereas for user experience, the goal is to produce useful and usable products for people, and for the company to have profits, to have a sustainable business. And so UX might work on creating scientific knowledge as well, but that's secondary to the products and services. How impact is defined for both areas is different as well. So in a nutshell, or in general, impact is similar in that you want your work to be used by more and more people, that it has an impact on people and on designs and products. But how it is defined and measured is quite different. In HCI research, citations are really important. How much other researchers use your work is really important and often easier to calculate, especially if you're looking at just number of citations. Whereas for user experience, impact is defined as like how much of your work is actually used in the product and how much it affects the business metrics like adoption, profit, reduce costs for customer, service. And so sometimes it's a little bit harder to define it on the UX side. Time frame is often very different. So for human-computer interaction, studies are, usually very well planned, take a number of months to execute it very carefully, to analyze the data and to come up with a paper. And, it might take months or a year or more. Whereas for user experience, we might have some projects that take months and a year, especially on the research side. Maybe there's some, but more often than that, we want really quick turnarounds. So for example, a lot of my usability testing studies take maybe a week or two. And we have the people we work with who will consume the results to sit in on our studies so that they can start getting the data early on and then they can act on it more quickly. So the time frames are a lot quicker in user experience. I also have to learn about UX terminology. And so there are certain established terms in UX. And I guess what I had to learn was that there are some that are established, but sometimes they might mean something different to different people. And so one area that this comes up in a lot is UX jobs. So remember that survey that I had talked about from Nielsen Norman. So they asked people what their job titles were. Out of 700 people, there were 134 different job titles. Here are the 4 most popular ones, and they're ones that you probably wouldn't be surprised about: UX designer, product designer, UI designer, UX researcher. But there were a bunch more that were not used as much, but in a lot of ways are quite similar, at least in my mind. And so, for example, down at the bottom, you see UI designer, visual designer. In my mind and in my discussions with visual designers, those are quite similar, probably similar roles. But maybe they're not. Maybe for those particular job titles, people mean something quite different. There's a distinct difference. And so this is something that I had to get used to in UX, to understand the established terminology, but to understand that there might be some subtleties and some nuance there. The other thing I had to learn too was that different organizations perceive UX differently. They might be, so to speak, different levels of UX maturity. And so what this means is that if you go into a team or an organization, your work might differ depending on how much they value user experience. And this was actually quite different because in my community in human-computer interaction, pretty much everybody bought into the value of good design and good process, whereas in a company, that might not be the case. So there are many UX maturity models out there. Here's a simpler one that I like, that I think covers a lot of the ones out there. Stage 1, no design, or the design is not done by a designer, sort of done sort of as it goes. The stage after that is using design for styling. So, a UX team will often get the request of, okay, we've built this user interface. The engineering team will say that we built this user interface, and please just help us make it look pretty. make sure that the colors look nice, that the icons are nice. The next stage after that is to use design in the process itself. And so that is using user-centered design of understanding the users, identifying the problem, and really embedding user-centered design in your software development process. And then the stage after that is using design as strategy. And so this is where the company itself embraces user experience and good user experience to direct its product strategy, uses it as a strategic advantage. And a company like Airbnb might fit into the stage where their CEOs started off as designers. And one of the first things they were asked to do as they were raising money was to actually go out and talk to hosts and really do their research. I would say that my team is around stage 3, where we have UX buy-in from the various teams. We don't have to convince them that good usability is important, and we are working on our maturity to get better at identifying where a useful and usable interface might be a strategic advantage, and really trying to get more of our company on board with user-centered design. And so why this matters is that, depending on what stage a company is at, your work might be quite different. I've been in a company before that was at a lower stage, where a lot of my time was spent just trying to get buy-in, trying to convince somebody that good usability was important and to invest into design and research. Now in my role, I don't have to do that. I spend more of my time, I would say a third of my time researching, the other third disseminating results, sharing it to the people I work with in a timely way that they can act on it. And the other one is just to listen, just to be around in the software development decision-making to figure out what actions are being taken, where I can contribute, and where the product is at. So I mentioned that, I have to work with a number of people, and we call them stakeholders. And there are different types of stakeholders. So you have other UX professionals. So I support the designers on my team. There are product managers, there's the engineering team, there's executives, and there's many more. What I had to learn is that each of these groups have a certain culture themselves, certain terminology, certain goals, established goals. So for example, product managers, one of the important things for this group is that they will build a product on time, on budget, with minimal risk. And so, it's really important for me to understand what their goals are so that I can align and help them out. The other part too that I had to understand is that my individual stakeholders, that they differ by individual as well. So I had to understand that like one product manager might not be exactly like another one. So they might differ by how much they value user experience, what their experience has been with research. So they might have had a really positive experience with research and welcome it, or they might have had a negative one and think it's a waste of time. And they also might have different goals for their products. So it was really important for me to understand sort of where they're coming from and really build bridges at an individual level. So now that I could understand a bit more about user experience, I learned about how I myself can contribute. And so I'm going to talk about hard skills and soft skills. And so hard skills, these are your teachable skills that you can sort of gauge your mastery on. And I like to think about design and research skills as a T. And so you have breadth, and these are really the skills across the whole design process. And so I mentioned before, understanding the user, identifying their problem, exploring solutions, testing, prototyping, iterating, and so on. I feel it's very important for a UX professional to be competent in each of these stages, that they have some understanding of each of the stages, what's important, what the goals are, how they feed into each other, and to have some experience in each of those, so that if they're ever called to do that type of work, they would know where to start. They would have, reasonable chance of success there. And this is especially important when, you're working for, let's say, a smaller UX team, or maybe an agency where you have, you're working on for various different clients on different projects. It's important that you're able to do different parts of the design process. But I also think that there's a lot of value in having depth in a certain area, having some expertise. So for myself, that would be research. For my graduate research, I looked at mobile devices and older adults, so I have some expertise there. And I think having some expertise really helps. One is that you're competitive in a certain area, and then also that it makes it easier to collaborate with other people. So as I probably hinted at, when you're working on a project, you're often working with a lot of different people, super multidisciplinary. And even on the UX team, it's multidisciplinary as well, so to speak. So I can imagine a project that I'm on where we're working on some kind of software for our target users. I would come in as a researcher, and we would have somebody whose expertise is on visual design. They would do all the icons, they would work on layout, styling, making sure it's consistent. We would have an interaction designer. We would have somebody who works on content, who's really good at content strategy, on creating, on writing things up with the right tone. And so having this depth really helps us to acknowledge each other's strengths, and then we can figure out how we can work better together. So I would highly encourage that if you are interested in becoming a UX professional, that you identify your T and really work on it. I have to say that soft skills are very valuable, and sometimes they are undervalued. So on a resume, you might write down that you're excellent communicator. And sometimes when you look at that, you think it's sort of very fluffy. But really, in the work we do, soft skills are super important. They might be really, they're very important to getting a job, but I think they're even more important to succeeding at work and making a big impact in the work you do. So what are some of these soft skills? One is teamwork. We work with a lot of different people, and being able to play nicely with different people is super important. So as I mentioned, we work with different stakeholders, but we also work with just different individuals. So some people who are quieter, some people who are louder, people who have various experience with user experience, different goals, some people who are nicer and some who are not. So it's really important to be able to work with different people. Communication, as I mentioned, is very important. One specific area where communication is super important is the area of giving feedback and receiving feedback. We want to be able to give really helpful honest feedback, whether it's on a process or on a design, but we don't want to ruin relationships. And then also we want to receive feedback, to get honest feedback, to welcome it, so that people don't feel like they have to sugarcoat it so much that we can't really understand what that feedback is. And so there's definitely a skill in terms of asking for that feedback. And so, yes, communication is very important. Project management, time management, being able to multitask and prioritize things is also very important and can really impact how well you do your work. Two areas that I think are very important but probably aren't talked about as much is this area of resilience and anticipating issues and opportunities. So as I mentioned, Samsung executes very fast, and oftentimes we're under extreme time pressure that they need the research done yesterday. And so how I and my team handle that pressure is really important and will dictate how successful we are. The other area is anticipating issues and opportunities. And this is actually one area that I work with co-op students, they're on my team. And this is one area that I encourage them to especially grow on, is that it's not enough to just do the work that's given to you and full stop. Because business goals and priorities change, and they can change very quickly, it's really important to anticipate issues and opportunities as they come up. And so I'm asking the students in my team to be proactive, to, if you have some extra time, see what you can do to help. There's lots of ways that you can continue contributing even if you're not asked to. So I feel like what I've mentioned to you, you're probably in agreement that they are important, but I would say that there are lots of opportunities, especially in graduate school, to work on these and to get better, and I encourage you to do that. You work in teams, you have to communicate a lot, you multitask, really take the opportunity to learn, to grow, and to do better on these, because it will help you in your job, and secondly, in an interview, we are looking for these things, for how you communicate. We imagine, like, can we get along with you? And could we work together, as colleagues? So these things are very important. So there's a quote supposedly by Aristotle that goes, "Where the needs of the world and your talents cross, there lies your vocation." So this is the aspect of fit. Fit is very important, especially in user experience as a UX professional. And I think it goes beyond talent. So I've talked about hard skills and soft skills, but I also want to talk about just like how individuals are wired and things that they naturally do well or they don't feel is work. And I think this is an aspect that can really influence how successful you are at work. Is if you can find work that in general or often doesn't feel like work, you would do it even if you weren't paid, that would help you to be more successful. So for example, I myself, I'm not a particularly creative person, but I am more on about optimizing things. So if I see a process, I will look at how you can improve that. I really like improving processes, practices, and that doesn't feel like work to me. Secondly, I really like helping people. And I do like, taking a lot of data that might be confusing and trying to distill insights from that, to bring clarity from that and to share it with people. I just naturally do that. So I feel like a UX researcher job is a really good fit for me. So just think about yourself. How are you wired? Are you more creative, analytical? Do you like working closely with a lot of people? Maybe you're more extroverted. Or do you like more deep work where you're sort of alone for a long period of time, get to really get at some, work on something really deep? Do you like established processes? Or do you actually like to make up your own rules, and you prefer if there were less rules? And so things like that, just understanding your strengths and how you're wired can really help you to figure out what job would be suitable for you. So it brings me to my point that fit is very important. And so it's really important to understand, what your skills are, sort of how you're wired. And when you're looking for work, you would go and look for possible fits. You would read a job description, say, okay, hey, I could probably do that. And then what you do is you would tailor your job application for that. And I highly recommend tailoring your resume and your cover letter to that particular job description to sell your fit. But it's not that's not it. I think that's sort of it at a that's a sort of very surface understanding of both the company and the job opportunity and yourself. And so if you can get to the interview, then that's really a time for the company to understand whether you're a good fit for them. And so they'll look at your hard skills, soft skills, learn more about you, imagine how it would be to work with you. But it's also your opportunity there to understand where they're at and what their unique challenges are and what their unique culture is, so that you can understand, how good of a fit you are for them, and to be able to sell that more. Or maybe you can understand that, no, maybe this isn't what you expected, and that, this probably wouldn't work. And then I guess why I bring this up as being very important is that I feel like when you're looking for a good UX job, one that you'll enjoy and you'll be able to contribute in, it's really more, I feel, like dating than competing. Sure, you sort of have to have a certain standard for your soft skills and hard skills. But I know, just speaking from the interviewing side, we're often looking for, somebody who can complement our team. So somebody who might bring a certain, has a certain viewpoint that's similar to our team, or maybe that has a unique skill set that we don't have, or just brings a certain energy that we either need or that gels with us. And so I feel like when you are interviewing for a job, you're trying to sort of gauge how compatible you are. And if you don't get a job, if you're not hired, I feel like a lot of times it's just that, you weren't compatible for that specific situation, or that particular challenge they were looking for. But it's not so much that you weren't a great candidate. It's really not personal, and it's they were looking for something very specific that maybe didn't even come across in the job interview. So really the application here is, apply widely, see what, possible opportunities are a good fit for you, and just go with it, just sort of understand. And if both sides don't feel that it's a compatible fit, then just keep searching. And I know sometimes it's hard to not get hired, but really oftentimes it's not because of you per se, it's just because of the lack of fit. So in summary, I talked about just some of the lessons that I learned, both in graduate school, my interest in design process, the importance of really strengthening my analytical thinking, developing my communication skills, and then afterwards to learn what user experience looks like, what the culture is like sort of broadly and at different, in different teams, thinking about how I contribute, what I need to work on and what I need to grow in, and really finding a fit. And I'm fortunate to say that I found a job that I quite enjoy, people that I really like working with, Of course, there are challenges that I have to work with, but overall, I'm very thankful for where I am. Some takeaways for you. So discover your strengths and interests, and really take time to reflect on what that is, because you have a lot to contribute. And it's good to be able to figure out what that is. Work on your T, especially through your experiences in graduate school or on your internship. If you feel there are some gaps there, find opportunities to work on those. Maybe volunteer. There's lots of design projects that are out there that could use a hand. Keep working on those communication skills. Don't think I have to say anything more on that. And lastly, I would suggest doing information interviews. So this is really your chance to sort of research what's out there, to figure out what a UX job might look like. So find somebody who has a job that you might be interested in. Take them out for coffee, ask them about it, and you'll be surprised. It will really shape what type of job you pursue, because it will tell you sort of what you might like, or maybe something that really isn't for you, and it will help you just to get more information to be able to advance more quickly, through your profession. Here are some resources that I would suggest if you are looking for some. So on the left column, I have some general ones for user experience. Nielsen Norman Group. There's Jared Spool from User Interface Engineering. He has a lot of articles and classes. Julie Zhou used to be from Facebook, who is the VP of Design there. She has a lot of really great articles on Medium. Look for the Year of the Looking Glass. And there's some great podcasts. One of the ones that I really relied on in past years is What is Wrong with UX? And really quite informative and entertaining. If you're interested in research, there are some resources there on the right column. Steve Portigal has a podcast where he interviews research leads from different companies. Tomer Sharon used to work at Google. He has a number of really great books on research and working with stakeholders. The UX Art Collective, you might have heard of it. It's on your side of the country. They're out of Toronto, and they initially started up as a meetup, but now they're quite a huge established conference, and they're having one in June. And they have past conference talks on YouTube, and they've been just really fantastic. And Rosenfeld Media also has a research conference, and they have a community there where they share resources. So thank you for the opportunity to talk to you and share this with you. I'm always very interested in talking to students about professional development. I do this all the time at my work, and I'd be happy to ask to talk to you and answer questions. But yes, I feel like you have a lot to contribute in the UX area, and I wish you all the best.